like I was saying, since we are live, there's some more advanced ways that you can build up shapes and manipulate that the way that those shapes look, and more easily combine the organic shapes that these animals provide by default with some of the more geometric types of ideas that we're trying to kind of focus on combining with this assignment. So we're going to focus specifically on these two, the direct selection tool and the shape builder tool, in the demo, as well as talk a little bit about the eyedropper tool. So you can start filling these in with a little bit of color. Good morning. So if we are on our, let's see, I was doing the lizard for your guys' class. Let me reopen my file, my progress thus far. Still just kind of working to build this lizard out of basic shapes. I'm going to close these panels for now because we'll use those later. But if you're looking to get this floating shape box, you click and hold on the shape tool. And then there's this very, very tiny, let me try it again. Click and hold, there's this very, very tiny sidebar. You can see I'm hovering over it with my mouse. That's going to have the ability to pop out this window. So you can just click on whatever shape you need. Right, so I'm imagining I'm filling in my lizard here. Oops. There's one too many rounded rectangles, so we'll just put it there. Let's see. There's a bunch of triangles along his back, or their back, excuse me. If you need a triangle reminder, you can just click in the space with the polygon tool selected and use your scroll wheel to scroll up and down to get a three-sided shape. It's really tiny. Let's make it a little bit larger. There we go. Okay. Resize this guy a little bit. Sorry, that thing is distracting. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Stuff we've been doing. Making our animals out of geometric shapes. Cool stuff, right? Just imagine I'm just holding Alt and clicking and dragging a bunch to make these kind of spine shapes. So I can work with that later. Okay, so with the direct selection tool, you are able to do what's called expanding your shapes. I'm realizing now I chose a really hard animal to turn into a geometric shape. I'm gonna have to do a lot of triangles for the scales. But you can still do the things that I'm about to show you with the direct selection tool on your own artworks and designs. So we're looking right here at just some type of shapes that we've laid out with our just geometric thus far. You take the direct selection tool, which is A on your keyboard, and it is right next to the selection tool on the top bar. Here, I'm gonna pop this out. My direct selection tool is right here, so you can see it a little bit better. With this selected, you can click on a path and, actually I skipped a step. You gotta click on it with your selection tool first so that you can see this bounding box. And then with your direct selection tool, you will lose the bounding box, but you will still see the relationship between the anchors. You want to think about anchors like coordinates, right? They are stops along the way that this curve is mathematically happening between. Okay. But with your direct selection tool, you can actually move those anchor points. If you double click on the squares, that allows you to adjust the way that these shapes look to create something a little bit more accurate to your creature, right? So I'm noticing I'm losing a little bit of curve right here in between kind of this jaw ellipse and this cheek ellipse, to use like human anatomy on this lizard. I can click on this anchor point right down here and I can pull that up to increase the curve between these 2 points and kind of close that gap between these two circles right here. You'll also notice, this will make more sense when we get to the pen tool, but when you click on an anchor point with the direct selection tool, you get two of these handles that pop out. The handles always have circular like knobs on the top of them. And if you grab that circular knob, you can adjust the angle of the curve, kind of like a y-axis, and it's going to affect how the curve is looking, even going so far as folding it over onto itself. So you got to be careful if you're adjusting these handles. The length of the handle, see if I make my handle longer or shorter, makes the curve more curved or less curved, more straight. The shorter it is, the more straight it is. The longer it is, the more curved it is. So you want it to be, by default, it's about equal. You can adjust those handles if you need to. This is all with the direct selection tool. Another thing that you can do with the direct selection tool is click on a portion of a path in between two anchor points. So we have an anchor point right down here, and we have an anchor point right up here. If I click and drag anywhere along this line, I can pull that line out or in, and it will automatically do what it needs to do to make the other two anchor points kind of construct, right? If this was like a manta ray, it'd be like swimming, or like a jellyfish. Anyway, so let's get that back to a position where it's pretty close to my animal so far. So I can do this on other parts, like more geometric shapes like my triangle. I can double click, make sure you're double clicking on a specific anchor point to move that one around. So let's say I want this to be over here and this to be over here, and then this to be a little bit back here. Say I want to have a little bit more curve, right? If it's a straight shape already, if it already has hard lines, they can't become curves without adding new anchor points. But if it's already a curved shape, like a circle or a rounded rectangle or an ellipse, that's going to maintain the curve as it would be by default, right? So you can already tell there's a pretty big difference in the accuracy of my geometric shapes here because I've used the direct selection tool to adjust some of the relationships between the anchor points. If you click off of the shape and then click back on, you'll be defaulted to the regular selection tool. And if you try to resize, it's going to try to resize the whole shape. But if you press A on your keyboard, that takes you to your direct selection tool, which allows you, once you click on the shape, double click on the shape, I mean, more adjustability, right? Like this. So another thing that you can think about while you're creating your shape animals is the eyedropper tool. I think we went over this pretty briefly, but the eyedropper tool is I on your keyboard. And not only does it sample color, actually, let's do that first. The first thing that the eyedropper can be used for this context is to pull the color off of your off the background image of your animal, even though it's set as a template. So I know that my creature's ear, if I turn the stroke off, or actually I want to turn the stroke on and turn the fill off. I know that the creature's ear, my lizard's ear, is a little bit darker than the rest of its scales, right? I can click on this circle with my regular selection tool and then press I on my keyboard. And when I do that, anywhere that I click, it's going to sample a single color off of that area. So you can tell there's a variety of different browns and grays and kind of beiges going on inside of this ear hole. I'm going to click on one of the darker colors like this, and it's going to fill it in automatically with its best guess on the color information of that color underneath our images, right? So if I take this big kind of avocado cheek piece here, select it with my regular selection tool, and then press I on my keyboard for iota, I-O-T-A, I think is the phonetic one. I can sample any of these scale colors. I can go kind of the lighter sage direction. I can go kind of the darker amber direction. I can go some of this lighter kind of greenish whatever. When I click on that, it's going to sample the color underneath as best it can. So let's try and go for one of the more lighter green ones. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, but you'll also notice when I add a fill, my ear hole circle has disappeared. This is where you got to be really careful about knowing what shapes you made most recently and how they're going to interact with each other. So because I made some type of change to this shape, or I made it after, I made it after my ear hole shape, that means it's in front. It came more recently than the other one did. So to fix that, you can right click on any shape and go down here to this arrange section. The arrange section allows you to bring your shapes forward and backward, okay? So if I just want to go backward one layer, I can click on send backward, or I can hold the control key on my keyboard and press the bracket, which is right next to the P key. See how that I'm just holding control and pressing bracket? That's changing the stack order of my shapes here. So let's make this really obvious. That's a red one. That's a green one. And this guy up here is going to be a blue one. I'll undo this here in a second. Okay. All three of these have different layers. You can see the greens overlapping the blue and the reds overlapping the green. If I hold control and I press the bracket keys, which are right next to the P and in between the front slash key, that's going to move my shapes up or down in their specific order, right? So I can put this all the way behind the eyeball, or I can pull it all the way forward so that it covers the eyeball. I can put the blue kind of forehead piece below the eyeball, and the green, if you look in this little corner right here, let me zoom in. Okay. If you look in this section right here, if I hold control and then I hit my bracket keys, you can see that's blue in the front and then green in the front, right? It's a way to change the order of your shapes that you're placing on your creature in a really fast and efficient way. So I'm going to undo a bunch till these are not red, green, and blue anymore. And I'll talk a little bit more about the eyedropper here in just a second, right? So there's my animal shape. It's coming along decently. Eyedropper tools, I think I mentioned this, also take stroke and fill information, otherwise known as the properties of a shape. So if I have a square and a circle here with two completely different sets of fills and strokes, let's make this green and let's make this stroke weight. You can click right up here on the word stroke or on this little drop down. That's going to increase the thickness of your line for whatever you have selected. We're going to make that 10 points and we're going to make it kind of a hideous kind of earwax color. Right about there, right? Horrible, horrible lizard color. Double click on this. I'm gonna make this also kind of a, let's go burnt popcorn. Maybe a little bit more. Sure, we'll call that there. Okay, and then we'll increase the stroke weight to 5 so you can see that there's a difference. All right. So when you use the eyedropper tool that you're trying to do something with a selection, if I eyedrop this green circle with the earwax stroke, it's going to take exactly the same properties and increase the stroke and change the fill color to green. So whatever you have selected pulls whatever information you have sampled. It's going to be exactly 1-to-1. So if your stroke changes, it's because you sampled something with a different stroke size. I did forget to mention one thing about the direct selection tool. So let me get rid of these and I'll pull up a quick rounded rectangle as an example. Okay. To make it just, let's get rid of the stroke. So it's just a nice green. And then I'll also add a blue star so you can see that as well. If I click and drag and then I use my arrow keys, I can increase or decrease the number of sides. It's the same way you get a triangle if you need to get one of those. Let's make this kind of a like navy color. I'm just kind of messing around at this point. Okay, click and drag, set that to none. There we go. All right, so with my direct selection tool, I first click on the shape so that I can see the bounding box around the outside. And then I hit the A key. This allows me access to these little circles inside of anything with a rounded shape. So if I double click on one of these circle parts, I can adjust the curve of just that corner. See, I can make this a little bit sharper the further away from the center I am, and the closer to the center I am, the rounder it gets, like this, right? You can adjust how curvy the corners are with these circle parts that move on a diagonal. Or if you do that with your regular selection tool, it pulls all 4 corners. But if you want direct selection tool, so it's the direct select, you have to double click on a specific part and then adjust it as you need. You can also click and drag, maybe. Come on. It's not letting me. Okay, that's okay. There we go. All right, direct selection tool will influence specific points and you can make more curved stuff like this. Maybe you're trying to make like a pair of sunglasses. I don't know. The options are basically endless, right? Okay, same thing happens on something like this, even though the shapes are a little bit, the makeups of the shapes a little bit different. I can take my direct selection tool and you can see I'm afforded a ton of different circular parts that I can adjust on this star, right? If I wanted to just adjust, like, let's zoom in a little bit. This corner right here, I could double click on that and I can move that in or out however I need to, right? Kind of looks like a little amoeba now. Double click, and I can also double click on the anchor points here and change the size of those if I need to. All right. So the direct selection tool is a really, really useful tool for making these more complicated organic sort of layouts. And I want you to try using them a little bit today during our work portion. And those are the 2 biggest things that I wanted to show you. We have about an hour to experiment around before Flex. Before I cut off the Zoom room, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, so for the project, we need one that's only geometric shapes and then the other one that we mess around with the shapes.
I was kind of unclear on the directions. You can choose. So you can go a mix of 2 like geometric and organic, or both geometric, or as long as you have 2 creatures made with the shape tools, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Does that make sense? All right, any other questions? All good? All right, the rest of this time is yours. It is a regular Flex day. I forgot to put it on here. You'll have a new seating chart tomorrow. I got messed up because of the late start, so my fault. But new seating chart tomorrow when you guys are in class on Thursday. And the rest of the day is working on project 3.1. Make sure you're saving often. I'll check in with you and help you if you have any specific questions. Thank you guys for listening. I'm gonna wrap this up right now.